For the last 3 legislative sessions, there's been a push to take parental controls away from parents and librarians when it comes to what books are available to kids in libraries. Those in favor saying it's to protect kids. Those opposed say, well, that's up to the parents. Opponents of those bills have also been quick to point out minors can find much worse on their cell phones. Perhaps that's why, for the second session in a row, there's an attempt to legislate that as well. There's a bill to force cell phone manufacturers to automatically filter certain searches for their phones, which are sold to kids. Again, taking that choice away from parents. Okay, Joe, this is a big start to the week at the State House. We've seen other states start to take action on this monitoring smartphones for graphic content. So what's happening with Idaho's idea?
Yeah, and I know that a lot of national news was made just south of us in Utah. Idaho's law does not go as far, so let me explain. Senate Bill 1253 would require the manufacturers of smartphones and tablets like Apple, Google, Android, they would be mandated by law to enable the existing filters on devices for Idaho's children. Bill sponsor Senator Kevin Cook says that the filters, they're already there on the phone, they're installed, but they default to being off. So this legislation simply asks manufacturers to turn them on at activation, only for children though. Senator Cook says this is very narrow. The filter is only for internet browsers or search engines on the device, not for social media or other apps. An industry group though called the Cellular Telecommunications and Internet Association, they argued in testimony early today that the filter, it just simply isn't feasible for technical reasons. Idaho's parent groups though, they disagree.
The bill would add significant complexity for businesses and would create additional confusion at the point of purchase. Mandating state-specific technical requirements on devices sold nationally is problematic because operating systems and other functionalities are not designed on a state-by-state basis.
This legislation is designed to be parent-friendly, even for those who lack technological savvy. It acknowledges that not everyone has the capacity or the time to navigate complex phone settings and offers a simple solution to protect our Idaho kids.
So, Brian, the legislation also says that the manufacturers, they could face penalties if minors do end up accessing inappropriate content on the devices that they don't have the required filters on for. So a question for lawmakers is, how far should the government go to police content for minors, or should this just be on the parents?
Yeah, the people that oppose this, for example, the Idaho Freedom Foundation, when this bill came up last year, they called it anti-family, dangerous to privacy, and saying it's luring parents into kind of a false sense of security when it comes to things. Do we hear any of that or addressed in this?
Yeah, and the question, actually, the sponsor, Senator Cook, brought it up himself, saying this is a very narrow piece of legislation. Is this even going to accomplish anything? And he said the meetings that he had with stakeholder groups was essentially that, look, any barriers that you could put up, any kind of higher tier thing to make it an effort for somebody to, access that on their phone, then that's worth doing it. So I think it was completely acknowledged that this isn't going to end all problems on cell phones for children, but it is a step in the right direction. There were some technical questions that the committee had, but it did advance to the Senate floor. So we'll definitely keep an eye on this. But it is also an election year, as you know.
Sure.
Primary coming up in May, general election in November, and ahead of that, 2 big pitches. First, Senator Scott Herndon wants to change Idaho law when it comes to reporting campaign donations. Under current law, aggregate or total contributions less than $50, they can be reported to the Secretary of State's office as unitemized, aka with really no name attached. And Senator Herndon feels that there should be transparency on all donations, no matter the amount. Secretary of State Phil McGrain also weighed in during the committee, again, the idea to remove the less than $50 exception.
So essentially, we wouldn't have 2 classes of donors anymore. We wouldn't have the 50 and under and everybody else. Everybody would be treated the same for campaign finance contributions. Frankly, the laws that exist today where we have this carve out for the $50 and under creates more confusion than I think it's worth keeping in code, and it would just be easier to be completely transparent, simplify our campaign finance laws, and have everything disclosed.
Most of us, and the conversations I've had with some of you, are already reporting every dollar we get. I literally have a donor who's given me $1, and it's publicly reported at $1. I really do think this is a policy decision for you on where you want it to. We're happy to execute it however, but it does kind of seem simpler in terms of ensuring that people aren't passing a hat or doing some activities that otherwise don't meet the current spirit of the law.
Okay, so speaking of elections and Secretary of State Phil McGrain, a year ago we talked about the idea of an Idaho voter guide. Idaho is one of the only states that doesn't have an official voter guide sent to voters. Our neighboring states, they do. So in committee, Secretary of State Phil McGrain, he said he wants to bring back the voter guide or create the voter guide, and he points to the Boise State Public Policy Survey as to the reason why.
What this does is has candidates provide information. So the candidates themselves would submit their information, and then we would add that to the voter guide. I think all of you saw the Boise State Public Policy Survey results. The most well-received question on the public policy survey this year was voters saying they would like a voter guide. 78.2% of voters said that they favor a voter guide so that it covers everybody, with only 10% saying they didn't want a voter guide. Voters know who they're going to vote for president, but they often don't know all legislative seats, county seats, and so trust, I think, is a state, it's in our best interest to provide voters with the information to make informed decisions.
So if this were to pass, Brian, and become a law, Secretary of State McGrain basically said, there wouldn't be enough turnaround time for a primary guide in May,
Gotcha.
but they would try to get one out in November. So this was a print hearing, so the legislation has been printed, so we'll start to see where it goes. I know there's a big question about, if the candidates submit something, who would be fact-checking whatever they put in there? So that's a conversation to be had.